The progressive era is the next era we're going to talk about. It's a long, long topic, folks. Progressives today are not what progressives were back then, okay? Today, the progressives are the blue hair and the green hair people that are all woke, and they are fighting for trans rights and things like that. That's the progressive era of today, okay? The environment is also very high on their list as well. Back then, progressives were people that wanted to progress America or move America out of the Gilded Age and restore democracy to the people, give the power back to the people, and also to make sure that economic opportunities were not just for the chosen few robber barons as well. Progressives were on both in both political parties. So you had progressive Republicans and progressive Democrats at the same time. They're all trying to get America back to where we the people, have the power again. So corrupt political machines, let's talk about that. Corrupt politics was common at all levels after the Civil War. Political machines were these big clubs of politicians that controlled many major U.S. cities through a few ways. A, efficiency. These are grassroots organizations which allowed precinct captains to meet the needs of people for their political bosses while encouraging people to vote for their political party. Okay, so in each organization for the political machine, you have the boss at the top, probably a city boss, followed by the ward bosses, and then the precinct captains are the guys that walk around on the street and they give out Christmas toys and they give out turkeys for Thanksgiving. Precinct captains are the ones that know your name. They know what medication your mom is taking because they're going to the pharmacy and buying it for her to help you out, okay? So another reason why political machines were so bad is ignorance. Many immigrants could be manipulated for votes. If you give them a place to live and give them a job, they will vote for you. Patronage is hiring city workers based on political support. Okay, if they vote for you, you give them a job. That's what patronage is. Okay, and graft, using fraud to generate money for payoffs. The most common type of graft in the Gilded Age is called a kickback, where you receive a job from the political machine, but you're expected to kick back a portion of your income to that political machine for the honor of having that job. And you are also expected to vote for the political machine. The most infamous political machine was Tammany Hall in New York City, which was controlled by Boss Tweed. Okay, Boss Tweed stole hundreds of millions of dollars from the citizens of New York, and he gave that money back to them in the form of payoffs for votes and stuff like that. So Thomas Nast was a famous political cartoonist at the time, but this is really going to make his career. Thomas Nast started drawing pictures of Boss Tweed with money bags, sitting on a throne of money, had money for a head, so that kind of stuff. And eventually, Boss Tweed is going to be, he's going to be brought up on charges, and he's going to have to escape the United States, and he leaves and goes to Spain where he's arrested, and he comes back to the United States to serve time for what he had done. Aside from creating all these political cartoons for Boss Tweed, he also created the Democratic donkey and the Republican elephant as well. So we still use Thomas Nast's political cartoons. All right, at the national level, President Ulysses S. Grant's administration was riddled with scandals. It was one of the most scandalous administrations in all of American history. Grant was drunk most of the time, and he let his friends run the show, and they stole everything that they could. So the big scandal was called the Credit Mobilier scandal, which involved the company that was actually creating the Transcontinental Railroad that connected up at Promontory Point, Utah. They were charging triple what the railroad should cost, and Congress was paying that, but they were getting kickbacks from the railroad construction company, Credit Mobilier, and that's how that went down. Okay. All right, presidential administrations. Rutherford B. Hayes is next. Okay. Rutherford B. Hayes is forever known as the Ku Klux Klan president, even though he wasn't a member. So what happened was there was an election, and he was running against a Democrat named Samuel Tilden. Rutherford B. Hayes is a Republican. And it all came down to one state. Okay? All the votes were in for this election, and this one state was Louisiana. And Louisiana sent Klansmen up to Washington, D.C., and they offered Hayes the price of his election was that he was going to have to end Reconstruction, which is this time period where we're trying to take the North and the South and put them back together after the Civil War. So he had to withdraw all federal troops from the South and give white men back the right to vote and run for office. Hayes was the first president to fight for reform after the Civil War. He goes after Senator Roscoe Conkling, the New York State political machine, and its control of the New York Customs House. And in this process, as he's going after the Customs House, which is the house in New York City where they collect all of the tariffs, that was where he was working. They fire the guy that's in charge of that. He's later on going to become president of the United States. Okay, his name is Chester Arthur. All right, the next election, James Garfield and Chester Arthur. Nobody was excited for these two guys. Okay, the Republican Party had split into two pieces, the half-breeds and the stalwarts. And so in order to make a compromise, they picked one of each. Okay, they picked one half-breed and one stalwart, and they ran them for president, and they won. Garfield becomes the second president to be assassinated. Okay, there was this guy named Charles Guiteau who wanted to be the ambassador to Paris, France. And he would not get the appointment from President Garfield. President Garfield basically said, you haven't done enough to warrant that position. And so he got rejected. Well, he ended up killing James Garfield. He shot him. James Garfield lingered on for about 11 weeks. He lost 80 pounds, and he ended up dying from an infection because the doctors did not wash their hands. So Chester Arthur becomes the new president after the death of James Garfield. And Chester Arthur was one of the corrupt Republicans. He's one of the robber baron Republicans. And he wanted to not be known as the bad Republican, as this bad president. So he starts to fight corruption. Even as a bad Republican, starts to fight corruption in the U.S. government. Okay, he passes the Pendleton Civil Service Act with the help of the Democrats, which basically means he went against his own party. So what was going on? We have this old system called the spoils system. And the spoils system says if you're president and you win, you get to fire all of your enemies and hire all your friends. Well, that system is what got James Garfield killed. And so to distance himself from the assassination of Garfield, Chester Arthur says, we need a Civil Service Act. So you're going to have to take a test to tell who gets the job from now on. It's not just going to be appointing people based on political loyalties like the past. So he goes against his own party, creating the Civil Service Act with the Democrats. And because of that, Chester Arthur is seen by his own party as a traitor, and he will not run for re-election. So we have our next president, Grover Cleveland. Okay, Grover Cleveland, there's not much to say about him. He is the only Democrat that was elected during the Gilded Age, and he had a Republican House and Senate. That means he wasn't able to do much as president of the United States because he was a Democrat. And then the Republicans come back with Benjamin Harrison. Okay, Benjamin Harrison is very much a robber baron style president. This guy did whatever the robber barons wanted him to do, and he got filthy rich doing it as well. One of the things that was passed in his administration was the Interstate Commerce Act, which established the precedent for government regulation of business. Let me explain what that means. So interstate commerce. So interstate means between states. Okay, commerce means trading. So this is the Trading Between States Act. So the Interstate Commerce Act says that if your goods go from one state to another state in the United States, that the federal government should have the power to regulate how that is done. And so we get a series of laws that come from the Interstate Commerce Act that basically say that railroad shipping is going to be now controlled by the federal government. You can't overcharge for shipping and stuff like that. He also has the Sherman Antitrust Act, which we've already covered this chapter. So the Sherman Antitrust Act, even though at the time it was mainly used to oppose labor unions, it attempted to stop the economic and political influence of robber barons and monopolies. So again, originally the Sherman Antitrust Act was meant to stop monopolies, but the Supreme Court was paid off to say that it had nothing to do with monopolies. In fact, it had everything to do with labor unions. That's why labor unions became illegal. All right, we got President William McKinley. Okay, McKinley is another big business Republican president and a supporter of high protective tariffs that benefited industry. So he wanted to raise tariffs that on goods coming into the United States to make it where people would buy American goods instead of cheap foreign goods at the time. During McKinley's administration, the U.S. fought the Spanish-American War, seeking overseas imperial possessions. We switched from isolationism, which is staying by yourself, to imperialism. And because of that, we got the Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, and Cuba from the Spanish after we defeated them in the Spanish-American War. Now, Cuba, we promised them with the Teller Resolution. That's the name of it. The Teller Resolution said that we were going to give Cuba their freedom after the war was over. But we blackmailed them at the end of the war and made them sign the Platt Amendment, which said that we're going to give them the freedom, but we're going to claim a base on the island of Cuba called Guantanamo Bay. We still own Guantanamo Bay today. This is where we keep our terrorists at. Okay? So next, we have the Populists. Okay? The Populists are the People's Party, basically. Mostly Democratic farmers joined the populist movement because the Democrats were not taking care of the farmers. They were doing a lot of anti-farming laws and stuff like that. So Oliver Kelly created the National Grange, which is a social club for farmers. This was meant to make it where if you're living on the Great Plains in isolation, you have a place to go to socialize so your children can find buddies and maybe even mates one day. And this becomes a political action group, and eventually it's going to morph into the Populist Party. The Grange helped farmers to do the following: organize groups to store grain cheaper and combat high storage costs. So we're going to make our own grain silos and not use the one that are provided by the railroads. Pool money for purchases of large ticket items. One farmer with 40 acres might not need a tractor, okay? But they definitely couldn't afford a tractor. But what about 10 farmers? You could actually get 10 farmers with 40 acres apiece, and y'all buy one tractor, and then y'all together work these 400 acres with this one tractor, and you get to share in the stuff there. Buy tools at wholesale prices. So why buy one hammer when you can buy 100 of them, right? Okay, and you can buy them for half the price, and then pass the savings on to the farmers. Create a political action group for farmers to pressure railroads and warehouses to stop charging outrageous rates. All right, here we go, y'all. Question time. The National Grange Organization initially helped farmers unite and establish cooperatives. Through these cooperatives, the farmers could do everything except, bam, right there, okay? You cannot just automatically choose to raise your grain prices. Grain and any other farming business or commodity goes at the going rate. It goes at the price that people will pay for it. So you can't just say, oh, today we're doubling the corn price. Well, the thing is, there's going to be people out there that are going to be willing to sell it at half off. And so you're not going to make any money. But yes, you can store grain cheaper, you can pool money for purchases, and you can buy your tools wholesale as well. Okay? So, a group came along called the Farmers Alliance. Now, the Farmers Alliance are actually not farmers. These are people that are allies of the farmers that know that farming is probably the most